Okay, you're live.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, Council. It's 5 o'clock, time to get down to business. I will call this meeting to order. Today, we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabek, the Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe and Haudenosaunee Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. I will look to the Deputy Mayor to move the agenda. It is moved by the Deputy Mayor and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that the content of the Council agenda for November 16, 2020 be adopted as presented. And Council, just a reminder that I will be bringing forward item 12.2.1, the judicial inquiry discussion, and it will go after community announcements. So it will be item number 6. Are there any questions or comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Any declarations of pecuniary interest, Council? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that position, please let us know and the general nature thereof. Adoption of the minutes from our meeting of October 26, 2020. It is moved by Councillor McLeod and seconded by Councillor Comey. Be it resolved that the minutes of the Council meeting held October 26, 2020 be approved as presented. Council, are there any errors or omissions before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Is there any business arising from the previous minutes, Council? Seeing none, that will bring us to community announcements, and I will start with you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through you to the community, I guess a thank you and a reminder on the same subject matter. The thank you is to our staff. It was noted today by many members of the downtown business community as well as elsewhere that staff responded quickly in the early hours of this morning to clean up after the windstorm that passed through last evening. And it is greatly appreciated. The reminder would be to the community as a whole that it is incumbent that we take individual responsibility to ensure that our receptacle bins are properly secured, that the items in them are properly secured. I would encourage people to put their contents out in the morning as opposed to overnight, or even worse on a Saturday, where they then become part of the streetscape down the road. And so therefore, just a general comment would be, please, on behalf of your neighbors and the community as a whole, do your part to ensure that your garbage is properly secured and looked after. And again, through you to the CAO, to our Director Slama, a big thank you to her department for the work overnight and early this morning to ensure the town looked good.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor McLeod.
Nothing for me tonight, thank you.
Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the theme of congratulating staff, through you to Director Culver and all of PRC staff, a huge congratulations on the absolutely beautiful mini forest that has been planted out at Fisher Field. I encourage everybody to take a stop by. I guess mentally, when I heard it was coming from day one, I always envisioned these little saplings, which are great, but I was completely blown away by the diversity and size and the quality of the planting that's been done out there. It is going to be, it is already, and it's going to be an absolutely brilliant addition to our community for decades to come. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. I just want to wish, without saying any names, happiest of birthdays to the absolute best mayor that I have ever worked with. I hope that unnamed person enjoys their day and doesn't have to stay late in the meeting tonight. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much, Councillor Madigan. I'm speechless. Councillor Jeffrey, bail me out, please. Or Doherty, sorry, Councillor Doherty, bail me out, please.
Thank you. I have no announcements this evening, Your Worship. You're on your own.
All right. Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two. Let me find the first one because I wanted to get it right. On this past Friday, after being locked down for 278 days, our local Y reopened. And I had just a paragraph I wanted to read that they sent to me. On Friday, November 13th, we reopened the YMCA at Collingwood. We served over 100 participants and most notably have started the conversations with our partners about resuming some of the preventative healthcare programs that we typically run at the Collingwood YMCA. The Children's Treatment Network that operates out of the Y will resume operations on the 17th of November. We reopened our dry spaces and reopened the pool as well. And that's all I'm going to read off that, but that's a good news story. I think 3 of the other 7 Ys in Simcoe Muskoka closed permanently during this pandemic. So I'm glad ours is open. The second one has to do with the Legion Poppy campaign. That's over. I'm looking at an article that was in this is the good news, it was in the media on November the 7th that said that due to the pandemic, it was still unlikely that the Legion would raise the amount that they've raised the past few years in Collingwood. And the Poppy chair went on to say that unless something miraculous happens, I don't expect that we'll reach that. And I've been told that something miraculous did happen, and it was thanks to the people in our area, and that there will be no shortfall at all financially this year. And that's it for me.
That's very good news. Thank you, Councillor Berman. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I had one very important community announcement this evening, but Councillor Madigan already covered it, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind the community that the Blue Mountain Foundation for the Arts is having its annual winter's gift sale with their artesian wares for sale and all the things people like to buy others for Christmas and for themselves, if you're me. So it's running at their store on Simcoe Street and also this year online. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one announcement tonight, and Councillor Jeffrey has shared with me her appointments for FCM for the upcoming year. And among the busy 8 or other odd appointments that she does have, she has been appointed to the FCM government as the FCM governance representative for the Jordan Municipal Support Program. And this unique international project for FCM is the only project in the Middle East and is focused on assistance to Jordan communities on solid waste solutions, while additionally supporting women elected leaders and municipal employees to understand their role in the decision-making process. So this is a great accomplishment, and we wish Councillor Jeffrey all the best in this new role. And these programs will also help Canada to contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the worldwide call to end poverty, protect our environment, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. So congratulations, Councillor Jeffrey, and best of luck.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Could I have just one moment to say something about that appointment?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. So in the letter of my international appointment, FCM not only recognized my experience as a board member, in particular on the Women's and International Standing Committees and the work on FCM governance, but it also cited the commitment of the town of Collingwood that it's made to international relations through its work on the inaugural Habitat in Towns and Collingwood World Summit. So this is such a significant opportunity for our town, as it is for the communities with whom and the group with whom I will liaise and benefit in Jordan. While travel is suspended, FCM has successfully and impactfully pivoted the delivery of its programs to the virtual platform. And I can't tell you how excited I am. I'm excited and nervous at the same time. This is a big deal, but there is so much potential to benefit our community while working globally in others. So I'm looking forward to it. I was going to do it under other business, but my additional 8 FCM responsibilities for the one-year term are Vice Chair of Conference Planning, a member of municipal finance and intergovernmental, a member of international relations, a member of increasing women's participation in local government, presidential appointment to the election readiness working group, a presidential appointment to the governance working group, the Ontario Caucus, Committee of the Whole, and of course the National Board of Directors. And I'll have more news on FCM under other business. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. And that will bring us then to item 6, which, as I indicated, I'm going to bring forward from other business, item 12.2.1, which is the judicial inquiry discussion. And it has now been 2 weeks since November 2nd, when Justice Morocco released his report. And because this is our first council meeting since that, and our first opportunity for this council to comment publicly on the report, I thought it would be worthwhile to have this session now. So it's my intention to provide my comments and then go around the table to allow every council member an opportunity to speak. Justice Morocco was appointed by the Chief Justice of the Superior Court of Ontario as Commissioner of the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry at the request of Collingwood Council in February of 2018 under Section 274 of the Municipal Act to conduct an inquiry into 2 major transactions that occurred in 2012. The first being the sale of 50% interest in the town's utility, Collis Power Stream, or Collis at the time, and one of the town's largest assets. And the second, the purchase and construction of 2 sprung recreational facilities, the Central Park Arena and the Centennial Pool. In paragraph 1 of the resolution, 042-2018, which I moved and supported, it requests that the Commissioner inquire into, and I quote, any matter related to the supposed malfeasance, breach of trust, or other misconduct on the part of a member of council or an officer or employee of the town or any person having a contract with it. And since Justice Morocco released his report, I've been asked many times by residents of our community, and specifically focusing on 3 questions. What were Justice Morocco's findings? What was the harm to our community? And what are the next steps? So beginning with what are the findings? As the Commissioner of the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry, Justice Morocco's findings have the same force and effect as a ruling by a judge in a civil court case. And if any party wants to dispute any of his findings, that person must apply to a court to have the finding overturned. Justice Morocco stated in his report that it was not his mandate to find fault or assign blame. However, as we know from the terms of reference, it was his mandate to look into the 2 transactions to see if there was malfeasance, misconduct, or breach of trust. And I want to be very clear with the residents of Collingwood. In Justice Morocco's comprehensive and thorough report, over 914 pages in 4 volumes, he makes significant and extensive findings that I think support malfeasance, misconduct, and breach of trust. Dealing first with the sale of the 50% interest in Collis, Justice Morocco found that the sale process was stained by undisclosed conflicts of interest, an unfair procurement process in which the mayor's brother, Paul Bonwick, shared confidential information with Powerstream throughout the process, a lack of transparency as council and the community were provided with false and misleading reports and information. Among his many findings, Justice Morocco made the following findings in Volume 2 of his report. First, that the sale of 50% of Collis was started in November of 2010 when Mr. Bonwick and Ed Houghton drafted a letter to Collis directing the utility to look at options including sale. That letter was signed by Mayor Cooper without the knowledge or direction of the CAO or of council. That Mr. Bonwick was retained by Powerstream to assist it with its bid to purchase the Collis shares in the winter of 2011. Ed Houghton, Mayor Cooper, and Deputy Mayor Lloyd were all aware of this retainer. Paul Bonwick obtained confidential information that he provided to Powerstream during the bidding process. Mr. Bonwick obtained this information through conversations with Mr. Houghton and Deputy Mayor Lloyd. Powerstream was aware that it was receiving confidential information, that it had an unfair advantage, and yet it did nothing to disclose or stop that. That another proponent's bid was $3.85 million higher than Powerstream's, and council of the day was never made aware of this. That the town of Collingwood received no legal advice regarding the sale until after the winning bidder, Powerstream, had been selected and the critical terms of the sale had been negotiated. That Mayor Cooper and Deputy Mayor Lloyd failed to act on the advice of town solicitor Leo Longo to have the town retain counsel to assist with financial and corporate aspects of the transaction. That Ed Houghton was instructing legal counsel for both the asset, Collis, and the shareholder, the town of Collingwood. On January 19, Town Council passed a bylaw confirming the sale of 50% of Collis to PowerStream and authorizing the mayor to sign any document in a form satisfactory to the mayor to finalize the sale. Two essential and standard elements were removed from the draft bylaw, namely the review of the documents by the town solicitor and reporting back to council on the status of the sale. PowerStream was involved in the drafting of that sale, or that bylaw. And with respect to the purchase of the Sprung buildings, Justice Morocco found that the final staff report on the recreational facilities, and I quote, produced a report that described and portrayed Sprung Instant Structures Limited as the obvious, cost-effective choice for council, and one that carried little risk or uncertainty. Misstatements, inaccuracies, and omissions in both the construction estimates presented and the discussion of the construction options led to this inaccurate representation. And during the course of Volume 3, Justice Morocco makes the following findings. That in April 2012, Deputy Mayor Lloyd and Mayor Cooper and her brother Paul Bonwick arranged for Mr. Houghton to become the acting CAO of the town of Collingwood. During the next 4 months, the council turned away from the approved plan to purchase one large multi-use facility and instead voted to sole source the Sprung Pool and Arena facilities. Sprung representative Tom Lloyd was introduced to Paul Bonwick in the spring of 2012 and was interested in involving Mr. Bonwick in the discussions with the town. Deputy Mayor Rick Lloyd had recommended Mr. Bonwick's services to Tom Lloyd. On July 26, 2012, Mr. Bonwick met with BLT Construction Services, Inc., the company that constructed Sprung structures in Ontario. And at that meeting, Mr. Bonwick offered to promote Sprung structures to council and the community. And in return, BLT agreed it would pay Mr. Bonwick's company, Greenleaf, a percentage of the overall contract as a success fee. Approximately 1 month later, after council decided to purchase and construct 2 Sprung facilities, BLT paid Greenleaf $756,000, $56,740.42. Acting CAO Ed Houghton knew Mr. Bonwick was involved with BLT and yet failed to advise council or the town staff. Deputy Mayor Lloyd instructed acting CAO Houghton throughout the process and staff and had inappropriate influence on the drafting of the staff report. But the acting CAO Ed Houghton directed Dave McNulty to include adjustments that artificially inflated the cost difference between the fabric membrane arena option and the pre-engineered steel arena option by at least $3.39 million. Mr. Houghton added language to the staff report indicating that the report's estimates for a pre-engineered steel structure arena were created solely by WGD architects, despite knowing the estimates had been adjusted by Mr. McNulty. The procurement process recommended by the staff report was changed from a competitive procurement to a sole source procurement under Ed Houghton's direction less than 12 hours before the report was finalized. The town's interest in receiving nonpartisan, objective, independent advice before a multi-million-dollar procurement was utterly ignored, and that ultimately the 2 Sprung facilities cost the town of Collingwood $13,906,886.17. So what were the harms to our community? Based on Justice Morocco's stark findings, there can be no doubt that the residents of Collingwood were victimized and abused, and that our community suffered real, permanent, and irreparable harm. The town invested just under $14 million in the 2 structures. The town left $3.85 million on the table in the Collis sale by accepting the PowerStream bid, which was lower than another proponent's. The staff failed to account for the additional amounts to renovate the Eddie Bush Arena, which was estimated to be between $2.1 and $3.1 million. And when you take all of these numbers into consideration, our community will have invested tens of millions of dollars in the Sprung facilities over the life of these buildings, only to find ourselves back at square one, which is to start the process to develop a multi-use recreational facility in our community. So what are our next steps? The judicial inquiry has been a long and complex process for our community and a very significant investment to find out what happened during those two very significant transactions in 2012. As Justice Morocco comments many times throughout his report, this inquiry was necessary to find out what happened because the parties who had the information and knowledge of the events in issue failed or refused to disclose what they knew. This report belongs to the people of Collingwood. This council takes each and every one of Justice Morocco's 306 recommendations very seriously. We have referred the report to staff for review and comment. And as we heard at the November SIC meeting, there are many recommendations that the town has implemented or is in the process of implementing. These we will review in light of the recommendations. For the new recommendations, we will work with staff and where necessary, the town solicitors to implement them. We will do everything in our power to ensure that the Province acts on the recommendations to change the Municipal Act and the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. We will cooperate and assist the OPP in every way possible in their investigations, which we are told are active and ongoing. My commitment to the residents of Collingwood is to work with this council to act on Justice Morocco's report in every way we can, and to work with our residents to rebuild the trust that has been so badly damaged. There is work to be done, and that work really began on November 2nd at noon with the release of Justice Morocco's report. So with that said, I look forward to working all of you around this table to making sure that we can reestablish our trust with our community. And with that being said, I will look then next to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through you to my fellow colleagues around the table, to our staff and to the community as a whole. I'm not sure what I could add to what you have already stated from a factual standpoint, other than the fact that I am the only current member of this council who was a member of the council between 2010 and 2014 to bear witness to what transpired. The last couple of weeks in particular have been difficult in rereading, or reading, I should say, I guess, for the first time, the documents prepared by the inquiry and by the justice related to that time period. The council of the day and key senior individuals failed the community. And for that, we have a significant financial burden to carry forward. With that said, I applaud the council from 2014 to 2018, and in particular the CAO at the time, Mr. John Brown, for asking the very difficult questions and demanding answers to those questions that the council of 10 to 14 failed to do. And for that, I extend my thanks. Looking forward, I'm hopeful, and I encourage all of those who care about Collingwood, who care about trust in government, that we demand that the work that has gone into the inquiry, be it Mr. Morocco, the justice, be it council, be it those who participated, that the findings are shared with those who have the ability to make sweeping changes, starting with the provincial government and the Municipal Act downward. I think we know and have known for years that we have operated within a system that has far too great a latitude to allow for things that have transpired here in the town of Collingwood. And they are not unique to Collingwood. There have been past inquiries in other communities, in other matters as it relates to procurement, transparency, competition, etc. And it's incumbent so that another community doesn't have to go through this difficult process and pay for another judicial inquiry, that we pressure our senior members of provincial parliament to take note and to actually act. It is not fair to the residents of Ontario or to the taxpayers of Ontario to have inquiry after inquiry go before a legislative body, or a cabinet, only to be either mirrored over, disregarded, put on a shelf, or given a brief dusting over. The findings, for example, in Mississauga are one example where an inquiry and great cost were used, findings were made, and I think that many would agree to this day, the findings that were implemented have yet to actually been, the findings that were found have yet to be implemented, and yet had some of those been implemented, we in fact maybe wouldn't have had some of the issues that we had here in Collingwood. The last two comments that I would simply make to the community as a whole is that although I didn't agree with the decision as it relates to the rec center, specifically the arena and the pool, I was utterly disappointed and disheartened that a member of our community would take it upon themselves to spray paint and graffiti the one facility. The youth of the community who use that facility had nothing to do with this, bear no responsibility. And many of them are thrilled at the opportunity to be able to play whatever sport it may be within that particular facility. My two boys are no exception. So to the community, I use that as an example to say that this has been an incredibly difficult process. And it is probably only Act 2, maybe Act 3 of an ongoing play in which yet Act 4, 5, 6, and onward are yet to actually be written. But as a community, we need to come together. We need to ensure that what has happened in the past doesn't repeat itself, that we collectively challenge ourselves to ensure that when we are working in the public interest, we are doing so in the best interest of all concerned. We may agree to disagree on certain issues, but there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that we are doing things in the people's best interest. And that is something that is loud and clear throughout the report from Justice Morocco, and was a collective failure between 2010 and 2014. The final point that I'll make is with regards to the ongoing investigation by the Ontario Provincial Police. I'm looking at my screen right now at my colleagues, and Councillor McLeod, when I was on that council between 10 and 14, it was you in your previous capacity who asked me the question for the first time on live radio, have you been interviewed by the OPP? And my response was yes. And I remember leaving the station and later that day being stopped by a couple of people who were shocked that a member of the current council had in fact actually been interviewed and acknowledged that they had been interviewed by the Ontario Provincial Police. The point I want to make, though, is that I am surprised and disappointed that after these many years, there are members of the community who still feel or still are under the understanding that the inquiry and the OPP investigation are one and the same. They are not. I am hoping for all concerned, and I do stress that, for all concerned, that at some point the provincial police, who are funded by the same taxpayers who funded the judicial inquiry, come forward with a conclusive statement so that we as a community can move over, and so that the cloud and the shadows that still cover this community can finally be lifted and moved onward. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to offer my sympathies to my former colleagues in the news media for the way this report was released. 1 hour in lockup with a report of this magnitude and length was, in my opinion, not enough time to develop a fulsome understanding of its contents and a consequent ability to ask meaningful questions about it. But now that you've all had more time, I look forward to reading and hearing more in-depth analysis of what actually was discovered. And after my own close reading of the report, I better understand the dumbfounded look on Inquiry Counsel Kate McGrann's face when she was asked why Justice Morocco hadn't made findings of wrongdoing in the report. McGrann, who I suspect could recite the thing, knew that anyone who's bothered to read it now also knows that the entire thing is a finding of wrongdoing. And not just a finding of wrongdoing, but a litany of malfeasance and misdirection and greenwashing and greed and enabling and willful ignorance, a cover-up and just general shenanigans. By my very conservative count, 60 times, the justice said he did not accept the testimony of Ed Houghton. 21 times, the justice said he did not accept Paul Bonwick's testimony. 22 times, the justice said he did not accept the testimony of former Deputy Mayor Rick Lloyd. And 7 times, the justice said he did not accept the testimony of former Mayor Sandra Cooper. If you're adding up as I speak, that's 110 times at least that a justice says unreliable, incredible, or untruthful testimony was given by the former highest ranking member of our civil service and several of our former elected officials, all of whom swore the same oath that we swear, 110 times. And as they say on Twitter, let that sink in. Now, I'm very cognizant of the cost of the inquiry. It grieves me that the town and the inquiry's lawyers were paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, and what we got was unacceptable, untruthful, and unreliable testimony, which leads me to wonder whether the price tag for the inquiry was actually worth it. 7 coming up to $8 million. And the answer, I think, lies on page 260 in volume 2 of the report, which is the part of the report which contemplates the opaque labyrinth of companies, of the umbrella company, which controlled 4 other companies that ran our electricity, our water, and our wastewater. It was called the CPUSB, and it was in action for 11 years, ending in 2015. And on page 250 of volume 2 is some testimony the justice does accept. An independent report showing the town would save $706,000 every year to bring just part of it, the water and wastewater, out of the corporation and back into town hall. So any comment about whether the inquiry was worth it has on one side the millions of dollars spent on the inquiry itself, but on the other side of the ledger, I'd say you have to put that $700,000 a year for 11 years that we taxpayers shoveled into the abyss of the CPUSB. And we don't know where that $700,000 a year went. We'll never know because of how the corporations administered by the president and CEO and assisted by the board of directors were operated. But the money went somewhere. And now it doesn't because of the questions that were asked and unanswered, which eventually led to this whole sordid story of the share sale and the rec facility construction being told in public. So you'd have to also add to the ledger, as mentioned by the mayor, the $3.6 million that was offered in the misbegotten share sale, but which got left on the table in the deal the judge called a cautionary tale. You'd also have to add the total to that total, the $756,000 that was blithely tacked on top of the price of the bubbles that got built by the BLT people, 6.5% on every doorknob, every screw, and every tile paid for by you and me. And speaking of tile, you'd have to add to that growing total the $360,000 we've paid so far for repairs to the newly completed pool building. And you can add that the standard markup on a sprung building built by BLT was 18%, but we got to pay 30%. And you can add the public money spent on the solar attic vents and any other deal attached to this cast of characters over the years, which are now tainted with suspicion, since the judge has deemed those people neither reliable nor truthful. One should also add to the tally of the town's expenses the loss of trust and the loss of opportunities when word gets around as a competitor in the share sale is quoted as saying, "The fix is in." So if you're mad about the price of the inquiry, as I most certainly am, think of the price we paid beforehand and that we would still be paying had we not done this. And then be sure to put your anger where it rightfully belongs, with those who ripped us off through malfeasance and misdirection and greenwashing and greed and enabling and willful ignorance and a cover-up and general shenanigans, and who stopped only when they were exposed. To our staff, I would ask that as you do the work preparing a report on the town's response, that you consider what actions would be of the most benefit as we rebuild from what was clearly a chaotic and fractured administration in the years 2010 to 2014, where elected members knew better, but made poor choices and diminished us all. Memories are long, reputations are hard to repair. And to my colleagues, I would beg that we never again let the good old boys prevail, as a councillor from that time was quoted in the report. That we insist on taking the time to make good decisions and put the needs of our town ahead of our friendships and our biases, and to keep our eye on the prize, which is being a functional, efficient, resilient, responsible, and reliable group which wants to move forward in the best interests of the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLeod. Councillor Comey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. My Wi-Fi is getting a little spotty, so I apologize. Just signal if I cut out, but thank you so much. It is unfortunate that our town and staff have had to endure this process. There are 3 greatly desired capital projects that have been before this council since we took our seats 2 years ago: Fisher Field, the Sunset Point Playground, and the splash pad. I hope the town has learned its lessons about being good stewards of the public's funds and their trust. Look forward to us working together as a council to bring these projects to fruition, free from delay, distraction, or distrust. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. And well said by a few of my colleagues before. It's truly hard for me to put my thoughts and feelings about this inquiry into words that would promote a positive spin with a moving forward attitude for our town, but I can do my best. The over 900 pages of this report, in my humble opinion, unfortunately, clearly sheds light on just some of the improprieties that were happening within our great community. My comments moving forward in public and tonight will be on making sure that we learn from the past. This report leading up to the findings has weighed heavily on the psyche of our residents, and we as council must use this information recommendations given to us within this report to help us get over the deceit, and again the word improprieties, blatant lies of the people that we once put our public trust in. I spoke in the last election about how choices mattered, and unfortunately the people that we put our public trust in left us no choice but to take action and protect our future. And I think that's what this council is doing, and I look forward to seeing what comes from this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Madigan. Councillor Doherty?
Thank you. I also, as with the rest of my colleagues, have read Judge Morocco's 306 recommendations with the corresponding rationale, and I agree with virtually every one of them. I agree that the implementation of these recommendations will significantly increase transparency and accountability for members of council and staff, both for this municipality and for all 444 of Ontario's municipal governments via the proposed changes to the Ontario Municipal Act and the Ontario Conflict of Interest Act. And I hope, as has been mentioned already this evening, that these recommendations are taken forward to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing and acted upon. I'll admit that the only recommendation with which I disagree is that which proposes the maximum tenure for the role of CAO of a non-renewable 6-year term. And while I appreciate that Judge Morocco's recommendation was likely based on the assumption that overfamiliarity with the role and the players could compromise the integrity of the position, as in this one situation, it clearly did. Such a limitation will have, in my view, serious negative consequences for the ability of the municipality to attract the best and the highest qualified individual for the role. Good professionals should not be discouraged from a career path because it has a fixed end date, thus limiting their ability to grow personally and professionally and to make continued positive contributions to the municipality. Further, imposing a limit on tenure does not, in my view, guarantee that the behaviors that the rule is intended to prevent will do so. I'll address the balance of my remarks to those in the community who continue to maintain that the judicial inquiry was too expensive and that the municipality did not receive value for money. I have lived in this town for more than 30 years, and the activities and missteps, like the ones described in the report, have been going on for as long as I can remember. This town hall operated under a culture of cronyism and nepotism, with certain individuals treating town hall as their personal piggy bank. Those opposed to the JI suggest that if everyone knew that these things went on, why not just put a stop to it? And why pay such a high price for an inquiry? But that is the point. People knew, they made jokes about it, in fact. They snickered together over commonly held nicknames for members of council and staff that played fast and loose with the town's coffers and limited conflict of interest rules, but nothing changed. How many millions of dollars were lost to the taxpayers of Collingwood over the years as a result of error, indiscretion, and carpetbagging? A former CAO once said to me that he had never worked in a municipality where so many people believed that they could run the town without being elected. Now, by holding town hall up to the light and implementing the judge's recommendations, this council and the one previous that called for the inquiry puts an end to it once and for all, and in a manner which is of itself open, transparent, accountable, and measurable. Council has already made many of the changes that were recommended in the report to our purchasing policies and to our code of conduct. We instituted a lobbyist registry, an accountability officer, and regular access to an integrity commissioner, to name just a few. We will continue to implement the balance of the recommendations that apply to the town. Many more recommendations go far beyond us, right up to Queen's Park and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And I am sure my colleagues will join me in saying that we will not rest until those recommendations are noted and acted upon at Queen's Park. While the cost was substantially higher than we had anticipated, once a judicial inquiry is started, we have to step back from the process and let it run its course. We have paid the bills and will continue to reap the benefits. There may be opportunity in future to reclaim some of the money spent. We may very well see some of the money come back to us in the form of approved provincial funding for needed municipal infrastructure. To the majority of taxpayers who supported council's very difficult decision to call the judicial inquiry, thank you. It is people like you in the community that keep driving all of us who sit around this table to a higher standard of work for you, our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I just want to start off by saying sort of my own version of something that Councillor Hull said. And I want to read something that I posted online the morning of November 2nd before the report came out. And I said that today we get a presentation about the judicial inquiry. I've been asked many times if I'm excited about this report, and my answer has been no. Whatever happens today seems very abstract in my mind. This whole thing has been part of my life every single day since August 24th, 2012. I find myself looking at this, though it were a 10-part mini-series entitled The History of Collingwood Politics, and whatever comes out today will be the start of part 8. Part 9 would likely be entitled Closure, and as some of my colleagues have alluded to, it could include anything from law enforcement to legal action to legislative changes and to a laundry list of other topics. The finale would be called Did We Learn Anything? And it would cover the 2022 elections across the province to see if we as an electorate have learned to see through the popularity and the rhetoric and elect the best people for office. So I wanted to just briefly touch on 3 topics, and I've tried to cross out things that my colleagues have already addressed so that I'm not too redundant. I wanted to talk about the money that was involved, that was addressed during the inquiry, the cost of the inquiry, and the need for an inquiry. So as far as the money involved, I think everybody's covered the topics that no dividends came out of the company that we own, the 3.85 less that Hydro One offered. The town's former auditor for Collis said that the town could have extracted $7 million from the utility without selling the shares or forming a strategic partnership. So we could still own this thing. The 700,000+ a year for dissolving the CPUSB, and on and on and on. So I'm not going to finish that list. I'm not going to read the quotes out of the inquiry. I just want people to realize that that's just the money from the 2 inquiries that the 2 issues that the inquiry covered. I, like Deputy Mayor Hall, when I was first interviewed by the OPP, April or May of 2013, there was a list of 15 things that we went over, and that's just me. So this money's just from the 2. As far as the cost of the inquiry, I know there's a lot of people that talk about, it costs so much and we were promised it was going to cost this. I was in the council chamber the night that the previous council, some of you voted to have the inquiry. I thought it was Will McDowell that had said that he couldn't see it costing less than $1.5 million. When I looked for the quote in the paper today, it was McDowell said the costs wouldn't be less than $1 million. So regardless, he had said you can't get to a place where there is as much you want to get to a place where there is as much transparency as possible, he said. If you could ignore the cost, it would be a no-brainer to do this. Once council voted, the entire process, including the cost, has been out of the town's hands. So how much less would it have cost if all of the parties turned over all the required documents when they were first asked for? How much less would it have cost if we didn't have to pay for the participant's lawyer? How much less would it have cost if everyone who took the stand told the truth? How much less would it have cost if the parties involved had simply been honest all along? So to reiterate what some of my colleagues have said, anyone who blames the final price tag on the council that asked for this inquiry in the first place, and I wish I had been part of it, is just plain wrong. So the final topic I wanted to touch on was the need for an inquiry. Now, some members of the public, mainly the parties involved, have tried over the past few years to say that this inquiry was unnecessary. Nothing to see here. We've answered all the questions. We've given you all the documents that you asked for. Justice Morocco disagreed. I'm not going to read the whole thing. There's a quote in front of me that basically the night that the council voted to sell the utility, his words, it was the first time the public learned the details of that deal. In regards to the recreational facilities, he said no sessions inviting public input took place for the recreation facilities. He says on part 2, page 106, in short, the justification for the share sale was a debt reduction fantasy. Page 130, had Mr. Houghton ensured that Airden Barreless was involved at this point of the sale, many of the issues I will address later in this report could very well have been avoided. Page 178, rather than fairly present the options before council, the staff report recommended a sole source procurement based on misrepresentations, misstatements, mischaracterizations, omissions, and other inaccuracies. He says, similarly, Mr. Houghton's conduct in permitting answers he knew were incorrect and misleading is an example of his failure to understand his obligation as the town's acting CAO. There was also a more insidious reality developing each time a member of the public was falsely advised that Mr. Bonwick had not been involved in the recreational projects. The potential repercussions for Mr. Houghton, the CAO, who didn't disclose the payment of Greenleaf's fee to the town, worsened. As a result, incentive to conceal the payment increased. Just a couple more. The revelation, this is on part 2, page 264. The revelation by the media of Paul Bonwick's involvement in the transaction damaged the reputation of Collis Power Stream and the town. Meanwhile, after John Brown was hired as CAO, his efforts to acquire what should have been routine information about the shared services agreements and the genesis of the share sale laid bare issues at the core of the transaction that have been examined in this report. And lastly, on page 289, he says, I pause here to note that the pursuit of competitive pricing, consideration of alternative contractors, the scope of research into recreational facilities by town staff, the extent to which BLT's budgets were professionally vetted, and Mr. Houghton's failure to negotiate with BLT were all central issues before this inquiry. So for anyone out there who said or maintains that this is nothing but a witch hunt, I think Justice Morocco's own words show that sometimes there are in fact witches out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Berman. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. And I would like to start out by pleading with our residents that if you can't read the 914 pages, you at least take the time to read the executive summary. It will give you a good flavor of what's to follow and some understanding. But what follows is the worst case scenario. It is exposed our most dreaded fears. And certainly we answered the call because the legal advice that we received on the 2014-2018 council was that if we did not proceed with this judicial inquiry, we were complicit in the actions that we had found. So, so it makes sense that my comments that follow, I'm not going to be duplicating or replicating anything said previous, is concentrating on the governance aspect. And the judicial inquiry was a findings of fact. It's not conjecture, it's not assumptions, it's not leaping to conclusions. It is findings of fact. So the 156 words I'm going to quote out of the Justice's report are as follows. Members of council, so 2010-2014, including the mayor and the deputy mayor, had campaigned on reducing spending, lowering taxes, and decreasing the town's debt. The focus on austerity served as the justification for both transactions and as an excuse for limiting the involvement of professional consultants in the Collis Power share sale. Roles and responsibilities of council members and staff were also misunderstood, leading to certain fundamental decisions being made away from the council table or behind closed doors. Undisclosed conflicts of interest marred many of the decisions made in respect to these two transactions, as did a series of unfair and precarious procurement practices. Combined, these factors left the transactions vulnerable to improper influence and cast doubt on both their legitimacy and the town's reputation. And he went on to say a few pages later, 3 members of council who voted to proceed with the sale on a 50% basis on January 23rd, 2012, had undisclosed conflicts of interest, which further undermined an already flawed process. So those 156 words alone behoove this council to advocate with the province for mandatory accredited training on governance, procedure, and conflict of interest for members of council that provide equivalent accountability, transparency, liability, and responsibility that was implemented under the Safe Drinking Water Act following the Walkerton inquiry. Rules and changing bylaws without accountability are ineffective. So I think my colleagues have really addressed and I would concur with those feelings in terms of what has occurred. So referring to staff's initial categorization of the 306 recommendations, I have these comments. This is not a checklist of minimal standards. As a member of council, I look forward to a full report on each and every recommendation as to what is in place, how it can be improved, and how does it exceed the expectations of not only the judicial inquiry, but more importantly, our residents. And with reference to the 32 or so deemed not applicable before us because we no longer have any owned corporation, I will be asking for council to approve the implementation of the recommendations in a foundational, proactive way in the event the corporation of the town of Collingwood finds itself entering into such an arrangement in the future, at a time when that council of the day may be a term or 2 or more removed from the JI, and the important recommendations therein. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So I look forward to our report from staff early in the new year regarding next steps after our legal and other professionals have weighed in and fully informed themselves of the total impacts and devastating impacts of the JI and what it will take to restore Collingwood's reputation on the local, provincial, and national stages. So thank you for the opportunity, Mayor Saunderson.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would first like to thank all of those who put so much hard work into the preparation of the report, especially Justice Morocco. The delivery of the report marks the end of a difficult time in our town's history and the beginning of our chance to restore the people's confidence in this council. Well before the calling of the judicial inquiry, the rumblings and rumors on our streets about who benefited and why were loud and incessant. Now that we have the answers to those questions, it's up to us around this table to do what we can to correct the systemic issues and procedural failures that allowed this to happen. We have made great progress, and I suspect we have a long way to go. In reading his report, I was particularly struck by the overwhelming number of times Justice Morocco refused to accept the evidence of our public officials, being both a former senior staff member and a former senior member of council, as well as a brother of the mayor. And so today it would not be surprising to find that the public has lost trust in us, their elected officials. It is my view that we need to continue to reaffirm why we are at this table. In essence, that we're working together to advance the public interest, that we listen to our public, weigh recommendations from our consultants and staff carefully, and do our very best to make decisions that advance the public's and only the public's interest. And in so doing, meeting after meeting, day after day, restore any lost faith in our local level of government. I'm not saying that we agree on all matters before us for debate and decision, or that we blindly accept whatever staff report is before us. Quite the contrary. It's only, as Justice Morocco pointed out, with full and open debate and questioning that all possibilities are put on the table, that all options are examined and the best decisions are made. As Justice Morocco says of council's power, and I paraphrase, staff reports are to provide fair, objective, and complete information. Council, however, retains the power to question the assumptions, process, or recommendations of a staff report in a meaningful way. Integrity in government is key. It allows people to go about their everyday lives, working, playing, and just plain living, with the knowledge that we are here doing our jobs in their interest. I want to finish by reading what I feel is Justice Morocco's message for us. He in fact repeats it twice throughout his report. He says, "When the process is not transparent, when the facts have been spun, courses of action can be fairly questioned. Public trust in the integrity of the town's decision-making is easy to lose. When the public trust is lost, the road back can be long and hard." I cannot end without saying that I'm so pleased that under the strong leadership of our senior staff, we have already completed or substantially completed 204 of the recommendations in the report of the judicial inquiry. We will be working with our staff and with our provincial counterparts to implement the rest. I look forward to completing this term of council with all of you, with whom I am privileged to sit at this council table as we take that road back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. And thank you, Council, for all of the thoughtful comments on this significant issue. And I guess I can't see the CAO Skinner, but I will give CAO Skinner a last word since we had the brief report and the brief time that we had the report, that quick report back to Council in this November SIC meeting. But Sonia, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add just before we move on from this.
Well, thank you, Mayor, through you to you and all of Council. I just wanted to let you know that staff have been starting to delve into the report and looking to get some information from more of our advisors. There was some good points raised today that we'll certainly take into account as we move forward, and hopefully get into those final chapters of this story. So looking forward to being part of the group that with staff and council brings Collingwood back to a different prominence within the province, the nation, and internationally with respect to integrity in the municipal process and being a leader in how municipalities can transform and do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Council Gain, for that. So this brings us to formerly item 6, minutes, reports and minutes of other committees and boards. The motion is moved by Councillor Comey and seconded by Councillor Madigan. Be it resolved that the minutes of the following boards be hereby received and recommendations contained therein be approved. And as one item, item 6.1, Collingwood Public Library Board minutes of October 22nd, 2020. Are there any questions or comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, Councillor Berwin.
Thank you, Mr. Saunderson. I'll ask to comment on that after we voted to receive it, if that's the proper way.
Yeah, you're just going to comment on the item that's received. You're not proposing any change. Okay. No. Seeing that's the case, then I'll call the vote first and then I'll allow you to speak. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Berman, you have the floor.
I just want the mic. Thank you. I think our CEO Ken Haig is here. Can we verify that? I don't like
we've got.
Oh, I do. Okay, so we as a board had discussed. I'm just trying to find where it is on the agenda. Had discussed or in the minutes last time having an explanation, because there are 4 rookie councillors on this council, and I don't think we've ever had an explanation as to the roles between council and an autonomous board like the library, the BIA, NBCA. So we thought it would be a good thing to go over that at a council meeting. So I understood that Ken was here tonight to address, what an autonomous board is, what role council plays with that board, even down to receiving of the minutes of that board. So I'll pass the mic to him if he's ready.
All right, welcome, CEO, and hey, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So through you, Mayor Saunderson, to council. I guess, I can't speak for all boards, but I can certainly talk about the library board. The key piece of legislation that governs the relationship between council and the library board is the Ontario Public Libraries Act. And in that act, it says that council will provide for library service for the citizens, and that the governance of the library will be placed under a library board, which is appointed by council. The council then passes a bylaw to form that board, and in that bylaw, you guys can decide how many people are going to sit on that board and what the composition of the board will be. For example, how many council members will sit on the board and how many sort of publicly appointed members will sit on the board, provided council members aren't more than 50%. So there's that sort of catch in there. But once the board is appointed, the board is the body that's legally responsible for the library. And I guess there's sort of 5 things they're really responsible for. The first thing is planning. So they're responsible for planning for library service. They're responsible to go out to the community, find out what the community needs in terms of library service, and then to set a plan and to create goals for how they'll achieve their goals for library service. And then basically they're then responsible. So the second thing is they're responsible for hiring someone to see that those things happen, and that's me. So they're responsible for hiring a CEO, and the responsibility or the relationship between the CEO of and the library board is very similar to the relationship between the CAO and council. So library board is the big picture, and then they say to me, I'm like Captain Picard, or no, they're like Captain Picard. They say, make it so, and I have to do it. So I have to figure out how to achieve the goals that they set out. The third thing that library board is responsible for is developing policy as well around how library service will be provided. And that again is part of their legal responsibility for running the library. A third thing then that they're responsible for is they are financially responsible for the operating of the library. So they need to prepare a budget, which they will present to council each year, along with all the rest of the town budgets. The board will also present their budget to council to be approved. They're also responsible for how the money is spent legally. I mean, I look after the day-to-day stuff, but legally they're on the hook if there's any sort of malfeasance there. They're also responsible for disposing of any capital assets that the library may own. So they're responsible for that as well. Finally, what the library board is responsible for is advocacy. So their part of their role is to be an advocate for library service within the community. And that makes sense. You wouldn't apply to be on a library board if you didn't feel really strongly about the importance of public library service in your community. And so part of that advocacy is they are supposed to report to council about how the library is running, their ideas for library service, their plans that they have for future library service. And one of the things that the past library board did was they decided to actually include these minutes at council meetings. This wasn't something that was always done historically. It was something that the previous library board decided as part of their role at informing council about library services. They would ask that library board minutes be put on the council agenda to be received by council members so that you would know what's going on in the library and it wouldn't sort of be a big mystery to everybody. So I think those are the big things. They're responsible for planning, for developing policy. They're financially responsible. They're responsible for hiring me and evaluating my performance. And finally, they're responsible for advocacy for library service in the community. I hope that sort of helps.
It's very helpful, and it's the first time we had a staff report or a report from a CAO, Jean-Luc. Sorry, Star Trek, but I guess what I'm taking from that presentation, and thanks Ken, is that the autonomous board, we're not called on to approve any recommendations. We're just receiving the reports or the minutes for information purposes, and that the board, your board, has the ability to take all actions relating to the library, and that your board has just agreed to share their minutes with us so that we're aware of what's going on over at the library and the wonderful world of books and things over there, plus all the social stuff you guys do.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's a good summary.
Thank you. Councillor Berman, was there any follow-up?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I think after 6 years on the board, what we spend most of our time doing is praising Ken for what an amazing job he and his staff do. I just wanted to follow up on one thing Ken said about our role of going to the public to find out their needs and wants. When I joined the board shortly after the start of the last term of council, the library hadn't done a strategic plan. My recollection is since 1991, so it had been going on 25 years. And we went through the process, really successful. But one of the things that we did was tried to mirror the process that you and the previous council had done roughly 6 months earlier with your community-based strategic plan. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So we're basically doing the same thing this term, delayed a little by COVID, and I think that the board has decided we don't need a new plan. We just need to refresh and update the previous one. And obviously, it's been a bit of juggling with COVID going on. And the only thing other thing I wanted to mention, and Ken can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but through 1.5 terms on the board with a group of different people, we have some very, very fulsome, positive debates during our library board. And I don't believe that in 6 years we have had a vote that wasn't unanimous. Ken can tell me whether I'm wrong on that, but I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it's a real testament to the people, not myself, that join that board, that they're all in it for the library. They're not in it for any other reason. So when it's presented what's best for the library, everybody's on board with it. That's continued to amaze me. And that's all. Thanks, Ken. Am I right about the unanimous vote?
Yes, yes, you are correct. I've been very fortunate to work with some wonderful people on the library board. It's been great. We've received terrific support from the members of past 3 boards that I've worked with. So yeah, I've been very fortunate.
Well, thank you, Councillor Berman, for raising that, and thank you, Ken, for joining us tonight.
Very welcome.
And that brings us then to item 7, standing committee reports. And it is moved by Councillor McLeod, Chair McLeod, and seconded by Vice Chair Comey. Be it resolved that Council received the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee report from its meeting held November 2, 2020, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. PRC 2020-8 Municipal Alcohol Policy. The recommendation is that Council approve the draft updated municipal alcohol policy to proceed to public consultation. And PRC 2020-11 facility allocation policy, and the recommendation is that Council delegates authority to staff to allocate ice guided by the principles of the facility allocation policy. And because those were adopted unanimously at the committee meeting, I will provide an opportunity for people to pull an item to comment. Before I call the vote, if you want to pull an item to change the direction, then you need to do that now and before I call the vote then. So seeing none, all in favor then of receiving the report and adopting? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And the next item on the agenda is the Standing Committee report from the Strategic Initiatives Committee meeting of November 4, 2020. And it is moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved, the Council received the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee report from its meeting held November 4, 2020, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. And the recommendation is T 2020-14 2021 fees and charges bylaw, and the recommendation is that Council enacts a bylaw to establish the 2021 fees and service charges. And, is there any questions or comments before I call the vote then? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And the next item on the agenda is the staff report. C2020-15 procedural bylaw amendments. It is moved by Councillor Madigan and seconded by Councillor Berman. Be it resolved that Council approve the following option to commence January 2021. which is scenario 4, scheduling all meetings on Wednesdays with the SIC meeting commencing at 2 p.m. and direct staff to prepare the necessary bylaw to amend the procedural bylaw to also include questions from council be submitted by noon Monday prior to the Wednesday meeting, and that the agendas be published not later than 5 p.m. Friday before Wednesday's meetings, which is 120 hours in advance. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. I've had some time to research and reflect on the input and the staff report that we received at the SIC meeting. And what I'm going to ask this evening is that my colleagues defeat the move to Wednesdays. And I'll talk a little bit about my rationale, because I don't think it would be fair for me to ask you to defeat it and not understand what it is I'm going to propose to bring. An option that wasn't available to or discussed by us at SIC was moving all meetings to Mondays with an SIC commencing at 2 o'clock and still being able to circulate the agendas 120 hours in advance. And some of the follow-up that I did contact the clerk to ask if there were any reasons, any operational reasons why Mondays could not be facilitated in that way. And she said there were none, that it would be council's decision as to when to do their meetings. And the other thing that came to mind, I'm not sure how we evolved from being respectful and courteous to staff members in providing our questions ahead of time so that they could respond to them at the meetings, into this process where we were getting or required to get full-blown written responses prior to the meeting. And I expressed to the clerk that I felt we were doing the meeting before the meeting, and she concurred with that observation. So in asking to defeat Wednesdays, what I will be proposing after, if it is defeated, is that we schedule all meetings on Mondays with the SIC meeting commencing at 2 p.m. and direct staff to prepare the necessary bylaw to amend the procedural bylaw, and to also include that the agendas be published not later than 5 p.m. Wednesday before the Monday meetings 120 hours in advance. And purposely have not included a timeline for questions, because I think these should be submitted to senior staff as soon as possible, and that we don't expect a great work on their part to answer in writing, but that they'll be prepared at the meeting to answer our questions so that we can do the business of the community. So that is my request. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. I have Councillor MacLeod and then Councillor Doherty.
I spoke last week regarding this issue of moving to the Wednesdays, and I said that I was indifferent to Monday versus Wednesday, although I knew I would be having my Mondays eaten up if I were elected. So I would be fine with that one way or the other. However, I have had an evolution in my thinking regarding how many hours we require between the release of an agenda and the beginning of a meeting, and especially in light of the judicial inquiry wherein such big decisions were made with not enough time to think things through. And yes, I understand that we have changed some of our procedures and created standing committees so that we have at least 2 weeks to think through things. But I was quite insistent last week in the SIC that we stick with 96 hours. It turns out we've been getting our agendas 120 hours beforehand in almost every case. So I'm fine with codifying that practice. And I'm fine with Monday or Wednesday, depending on what this panel decides to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mayor. Similar to Councillor MacLeod's comments, I am willing to convene on any day that works for the majority of council and for staff, so that they have time to prepare and we can all enjoy a fulsome meeting. But I am confused, because my understanding was that this whole recommendation of a change to Wednesdays was staff driven. And now I seem to be hearing back that staff, in fact, would be perfectly happy with keeping meetings on Mondays. So I actually would like to hear from staff, perhaps through the CAO, as to their rationale for, in effect, a reconsideration.
Okay, I will look to CAO Skinner to respond to that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Doherty. I would say that the reason that staff had put the Wednesday option on the table was because it did provide more chance to get information to council prior to the meeting and would decrease the flurry of activities on Mondays and make sure that folks had enough time to read the materials. So we are 100% willing to take the advice of council on what the best meeting date is, but I would say the staff recommendation to move to Wednesdays would make that easier for us. And I just want to reiterate the second time, however, the most important people at the meeting are the decision makers, so I wouldn't want folks in the absence of I would want folks to first weigh the needs of council itself. And before I give up the floor, I also wanted to ask if Clerk Almus had something further to add to that. I think there was some concern mentioned a little bit earlier about whether questions should be responded to prior to the meeting, and wanted to ask for her opinion on that piece, please, Chair.
Thank you, Sonia. Sarah, would you like to comment?
Certainly, through your worship to members of council, I think the key component of the questions and asking in advance was not only to give staff the heads up of the opportunity to provide additional clarification, but I think that it's most important that that information provides council with informed decisions. So further to Councillor Jeffrey's comments about the concern with meetings before meetings, that is something that department heads do try to emphasize when they do the presentation at the standing committee level, that there's further questions regarding a certain matter. So I think this is something definitely that we will ensure that is prepared basically for the transparency to the public. But I think that we don't want to hamstring council in not making a deadline, and that's why the amendment to the procedural bylaw that was provided indicates there's still flexibility in providing questions in advance, but not necessarily would a written response be provided, but staff would endeavor to provide the response at a council meeting if able to, or if the decision needs to be deferred, it gets deferred.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there any follow-up, Councillor Doherty?
No, thank you.
Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey, would you be so kind as to, well, first, as a professional courtesy, when time permits, if you're able to share in writing in advance, potentially through the clerk, because verbally, when you're speaking, I'm trying to digest and note it down. So could you kindly, I'm intrigued by what you're saying, could you kindly recap your vision for Mondays with the time, the start time of SIC and then into committees?
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, through you to Councillor Comey. So per the motion, it would be simply what we had envisioned for Wednesdays, only moving it to Mondays, so that we wouldn't be having SIC on Wednesday and meetings on Monday. We would facilitate to remain consistent that we knew that Monday would be a meeting day and that SIC would begin at 2 in the afternoon. So, and then as far as the rest goes, that the agendas would be published not later than 5 p.m. on Wednesday. That's sticking to the 120 hours that we envisioned previously on the other motion. And I haven't added anything specific with respect to timeline for questions, but I can certainly add that, or an amendment can be made if that is preferred if Wednesday is defeated.
Okay, thank you for the recap.
And maybe I'll look to Clerk Almas to talk, because I think in the changes under the procedural bylaw about the questioning period, you had discussed some wording about that, Sarah, to allow for maximum flexibility. Maybe you can elaborate on that, please.
Certainly. So I will read directly from the amendment that's proposed, and it's on page 118 of the agenda package. So it states that members are required to submit questions to a matter on an upcoming meeting agenda to the CAO, clerk, and appropriate department head prior to Monday at noon for a meeting to be held on Wednesday. Questions received by noon Monday, staff will endeavor to provide a written response to all members prior to the meeting. Questions received after noon on Monday may be submitted. However, a response from staff may not be available prior to the meeting.
Thank you. And hopefully that clarifies. Are there any other questions or comments before I call the vote? I see Councillor Madigan and then Councillor Hanlon.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. As this was a motion that I brought forward, we had fulsome discussion at the last meeting, and I guess my words weren't heard by all when I said I didn't really care whether it was on Monday or Wednesday. I just wanted to have it on one day, and since it wasn't brought up back then, I would have been happy to amend it on when we were in that. So I will be voting against my original motion to keep the status quo, but I still firmly believe that we need to have a time limit on the questions, because we don't have time to be getting answers at 3:30, 4:30, unless there is an addendum, then maybe questions can come in, but I'll still stand strong with that. But I'm happy to support my colleagues. I think all of us said we don't really care what day it happens. We just want it on one day. Unfortunately for me, it will affect me maybe having attendance in the meetings Wednesdays when we bump it, because I'm not going to rearrange my business schedule. Again, I have 2 days that I work within the store, and unfortunately those days are Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So, but I'm happy to vote against my own motion and support the positivity of the whole of council rather than my individual thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Madigan. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. Just two things. Firstly, I liked what Clerk almost read about how the questions could work. I thought that made sense. And secondly, I don't really care what day the meetings are on, but I was very in tune with the explanation that it would eliminate some of the flurry activity on the Monday. And I'm just wondering, and this is through you, Mayor Saunderson, perhaps to Clerk Almas, what can be done about that if we were to leave the meetings on Monday? And in particular, what I'm referring to is there are a lot of emails that come through Monday afternoon and sometimes quite close to the meeting. And I have to confess, I don't always have time to read them before the meeting. And I don't know if that's solely a question because it's Monday and there's been a weekend and so on, or if there's anything else that we could be doing. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. Sarah?
My apologies, Your Worship. Can I have that question clarified?
Sure. So I think, is there an aspect of the question, and maybe you can help Councillor Hamlin rephrase it or clarify it?
Well, I was just wondering, sorry, I'm not being very clear. I thought that Wednesday was a preferred date because it would eliminate some of the last minute emails we get on the meeting day, which I'm finding quite frustrating because I can't always read them all before the meeting. So I'm just wondering, if we were to leave the meeting on Monday, is there anything else we could do as a council to eliminate that problem of getting all the emails on Monday afternoon?
Sarah?
So there was a few reasons why it was proposed for Wednesdays. Another reason was if there's a long weekend, it's consistently always on a Wednesday. If it's on a Monday, then we would have to switch to a Tuesday, or if there is 5 meetings in a month, there's a potential of looking at it that way. So we'd have to confirm, which way, council prefers to go with that aspect of it. The questions, it could be as simple as there's no written responses available. There's a heads up the question's going to be asked, and you get what you get at the meeting. I don't know if CEO Skinner wants to add to that. I'm kind of seeing it as pretty bluntly, I guess, but
Thanks, Sarah. Sonia, would you like to add to that?
Thank you, Sarah, and through you also to Councillor Hamlin. I think that in general, what we like to do is where councillors have asked us for some help. In some times it's questions on a report, and then often there may be also wordings on notices of motion that will be brought up verbally during the meeting, for example, those types of things. And the intention is just to have as much information as we can provided to council who are making important decisions on the day. So I think it really is about the existence of the weekend just before a meeting and our inability to get you information that we'd like to get you as soon as possible before the meeting itself. That's the piece, yeah. So I mean, if questions come in, on the Thursday and the Friday, we could do certainly our best and would do our best to address those on those days. But it won't help as much for the questions you get in the supermarket on Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that assist, Councillor Hamlin? Any follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Couple comments and I think a question for the CAO. First comment is that I think we'd all agree this was a pretty light agenda compared to most. It took me 30 minutes, and that included the time I put into my judicial inquiry comments to go through this. Maybe at some point we could, or we should get a little guidance on how to efficiently go through agendas, because I agree with Councillor MacLeod. Like, I'm fine with 120 hours, but I was fine with the Deputy Mayor's Council that got them on the Friday before as well. My question for the CAO, and then I have a couple more comments, is regarding getting these sort of day of or afternoon of meeting last questions from residents. And I don't know, so I'm looking for your guidance. Is the council meeting the most appropriate way for councillors to be asking those questions? In other words, we have a governance system that has committee structures so that residents are encouraged to come and speak at those meetings and have their questions answered. I think this term of council, or started last term with former CAO Amin, has set up a great sort of service infrastructure with emails and phone numbers that people can call anytime they get their questions answered. So I'm not for a second suggesting it's wrong. I'm asking for your input as to whether councillors asking at council meetings questions on behalf of residents is sort of the best way to go about it. And then I'll look for your response before I make my last couple points.
Go ahead, CEO Skinner.
Thank you, through your worship, to Councillor Berman. There are many mechanisms that the public can ask questions directly, such as through the customer service lines at Town Hall. And certainly councillors often ask those some questions on behalf of residents too, either through the customer service lines or directly to the departments. However, those are typically not, I mean, they can come up on the day of a meeting, but typically the ones that I am thinking about in this conversation are the ones that are related to a big decision. Hypothetically, one might be looking at adding a new staff person or making an investment in something. And the types of questions that councillors may ask are things like, how many times did the staff member have to perform that task last year? Or what was the value of overtime that would be offset? Sort of decisions that are pretty essential, or they feel are essential to the making of a council decision. And those are the ones I'm most interested in. And those often are the ones we try to answer in the staff reports before they're published. But if it's not in the staff reports, may require some time for staff to put together. And we want to make sure that you get those in as timely a fashion as possible, more so than the, what day is my garbage pickup questions, which tend to be pretty easy and come in any day of the week. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Is there any follow-up, Councillor Berman?
Yes, thank you, CA Skinner. And I direct the garbage questions to the Deputy Mayor. I think the last thing that I wanted, or the two other points, one was I seconded Councillor Madigan's motion on the cutoff for questions, and I would do it again, but I do agree with some of my colleagues that this is really we get the agenda on a Wednesday. I'm 58. I don't have to be told to hold the door open for somebody or say please and thank you. I've learned my manners by now. We can get our questions in. We can do that. We don't need rules necessarily that tell us to do that or do the right thing. And the last point that I wanted to make is, and I didn't think of it at the time, Councillor Comey made a really valid comment when we first debated this at committee about supporting staff recommendations and so on and so forth. And I didn't think about it till after that. And I'll look to the clerk to verify, make sure I'm right on this, is that this term on the town website, all of our votes, our voting records, as well as our attendance actually, is recorded on the town website. So any resident, any council member, media, whatever, if they want to sort of see how people are voting or what they're attending, they can just go to that site. It's through you, is that correct, Sarah?
Clerk Thomas?
Through your worship, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Okay. I think we've had a thorough discussion about this, and I'm going to let the Deputy Mayor speak. And I think he's the last to speak on this item.
Thank you. And thank you to my colleagues for recognizing that garbage is in fact the most important issue. And as long as we pick up the garbage, quite frankly, we've done our job. So I'm going to perhaps break the rule that in fact we were talking about. And I just wanted to pose this question to the, through you to the CAO, perhaps the clerk as well. I haven't seen this in practice, and I'm not suggesting that it's not done elsewhere. But the flavor of the conversation is revolving around sort of timelines, the amount of information, the ability to formulate or digest and then formulate questions and be prepared. I'm wondering if, and because I have wondered this myself in the past, if we could have sort of a blueprint for the calendar so that the CAO could say to council, okay, here are the top 10 things that we're working on. And these are when we anticipate coming to council with these items. And then if there's a councillor that has a particular interest in that item or has questions or has been contacted, etc., that's something that they could start to formulate and say, okay, you know what, I'm concerned about that and I want to make sure that I'm prepared and I can do my own research and some background information digging so that when the issue finally does come out on the agenda, a lot of the legwork's been done. Because in fairness to some of us around the table, you know, we've got a couple of members of the council who are not only new to council, but newer to the community. And I think that if there was that sort of context of, okay, here again are some of the things we're looking at, it would give them an opportunity to say, okay, it's not an issue I'm familiar with. And I know that there's a history to it. And that's going to give me the time to start and do some of my own research, et cetera. So I just asked that in the context that perhaps as part of the blueprint to the actual calendar, that staff could provide council with a sort of a parallel agenda so that we did have an idea of what's coming down the pipe. And the other part of that I would just like to maybe ask and then leave on this note is that we did in the past at one time publish the sort of the ongoing commitments of the municipality in terms of things that were the pending list. That's the word that I'm looking for. And I'm wondering if we could revive that and again, make sure that we've got some dates that are established or set with that. And it, in fact, maybe would be the foundation for what I was just referring to a moment ago. So, all that said, I don't care what day the meeting's on, and I'm happy to work with whatever the balance of council chooses, and let's get on with it.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I will look to CEO Skinner. I know on the pending list, we've been indicating things like Q1, Q2, the quarter that we hope to get some of the items back to council. Is there a possibility to pursue the type of blueprint that Deputy Mayor was just speaking of?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to you and the Deputy Mayor. One of the things that we had talked about for 2021 is to have more of an operational plan that marries a number of the big things that we're working on, so they're better communicated. And that would build on the pending list, which we have published from time to time for council. The most recent, I think, was in the September SIC meeting. It was an attachment to the budget update that talked about a number of the things that we would need to look at together as we went through the next year. So that didn't get down quite to the month, but talked about the quarters and years in which a few of council's decisions were currently scheduled to occur during. So I think that while there is some things that still have some, still need to be scheduled, that as we move forward together within the mandate, that we will look out a number of months to what we, so people will understand their expectations. And we've done some of that this year for things like the asset sales, for example, pushing them into a known month of January for the report target right now. Thank you. Good suggestion.
Thank you. A follow-up, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I'm a fan of the committee system that we have structured, in the sense that we've got the two strikes. So having an opportunity to have things fleshed out with the three committees prior to coming to council should allow council to be in a position where we can simply sit down the night of council and really go through the agenda, unless there's a really contentious issue, approve and move on. With the exception, and the exception would be matters around planning, where perhaps there's a public meeting, or there's a public meeting as it relates to some other matter. And that's where if I could just pick up on what I was referring to earlier, I think that would be a real help to council if we had a better understanding of when maybe a particular planning item was coming down the pipe and when a public meeting would be held, because that in fact is when, and I used recently, for example, the discussion as it revolved around the development to the west of Silver Creek Preserve. And I mean, that came out literally sort of on an agenda, and we were inundated, a couple of us anyways, were inundated with questions and concerns from residents. And I think that had we better had an opportunity to know that that was coming forward, those who aren't familiar with the property, the history, et cetera, would then have that opportunity to do their own research in advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm going to allow Councillor Hammond, then I will speak, and then I'm going to call the vote on this. So go ahead, Councillor Hammond.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak in favor of what Deputy Mayor Hall has just said about the advantages to council if staff could give us a heads up when certain major things are coming to committee or to council. And I'll just use one example for myself. Recently, when the Airbnb short-term accommodation report came forward, I have been thinking about that issue for a long time, but I had to honestly, I spent most of my weekend going through it and thinking about it, and staff, council didn't see all my, deliberations over the weekend on how to approach it. And I had a number of people, approach me over the last 2 years on these issues. And if I had had a bit of a heads up, I might have gone to them and said, well, this report's here, coming, why don't you read it? Let me know what you think. I could say a few things about it, or think about, yourself if you want to make a deputation. But I just find everything's not knowing it's coming. I'm so busy trying to absorb what's in the report. I can't reach back. I don't have time to reach back out to people who've approached me, and they can't get onto the agenda. And I just find it could be better all around. And so that's my thought on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin, for those comments. And I can tell you that I did discuss the short-term accommodations issue with the CAO, and I think the way that council has evolved, and certainly council members from last term will know that we've changed the committee structure, and we've made further changes this term so that there are now 2 weeks between the actual committee meeting and the council meeting to deal with the committee agenda. But as well, when we on issues as large as or important as the short-term accommodations, there's no harm in referring it back to staff, which is what we ultimately did, to allow that discussion to go on and to drill down a little deeper into the concerns that we heard, not just around the council table, but also from our public deputations. So involving the public in some of these larger discussions, well, in all of our discussions, is absolutely essential. It's a cornerstone of our procedures right now through the delegation process and the ability to speak to a standing committee. And so it is essential that we do that. In terms of myself, I appreciate Councillor Jeffrey's position. And I do respect that we need to have all our council members at the table. So I will be prepared. I am prepared to go back to the Monday, but I want I think the public and council to understand that we're doing everything we can to give as much warning in advance, to make sure all our discussions are open and transparent, to make sure that we hear from council and the public during the committee meetings, and that we then have 2 weeks before it comes to council for questions and dialogue to occur. And if committee feels that there is more important work to be done or issues to be addressed, such as the short-term accommodations, we can refer it back to staff. So I think we have a great deal of checks and balances in place that weren't there when I first came into office in 2015. And we have work to do, as we've heard from Justice Morocco. So we'll continue to improve on our processes, and chief among those revisions being to make sure that we are as open, transparent, and accessible to our community as possible. So with that being said, I'm going to call the vote, and we have to, I'm going to read it again because we've had a fairly long discussion about this. So it was moved by Councillor Berman and seconded by moved by Councillor Madigan, seconded by Councillor Berman. Be it resolved that council approve the following option to commence January 2021. Scenario 4, which is the scheduling of all meetings on Wednesdays, with the SIC meeting commencing at 2 p.m. and direct staff to prepare the necessary bylaw to amend the procedural bylaw to also include questions from council be submitted by noon Monday prior to the Wednesday meeting, and that the agendas be published no later than 5 p.m. Friday before the Wednesday meetings, which is 120 hours. So Councillor Jeffrey has asked that we defeat this to allow for the consideration of the Monday option. And so with that being said, I will call the vote. All in favor? Okay, and opposed? All right, so that is defeated. Thank you. I'm going to turn to Councillor Jeffrey for her motion on the floor and look for a seconder.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. That council approve the following scenario to commence January 2021. Schedule all meetings on Mondays, with the SIC meeting commencing at 2 p.m. and direct staff to prepare the necessary bylaw to amend the procedural bylaw, and to also include that agendas be published not later than 5 p.m. Wednesday before the Monday meetings, providing 120 hours in advance.
All right, thank you. And do I have a seconder? I see. Councillor Madigan. All right, I think we've had a healthy discussion. Are there any quick comments or about the Monday option? Seeing none, I will call the vote then. All in favor? And opposed? Duly noted, and that is passed. And that brings us to item 7.4, which are the bylaws. And it is moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved, bylaw number 2020-72, being a bylaw to adopt the 2021 fees and service charges, be enacted and passed the 16th day of November. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you. And it's moved by Councillor Madigan and seconded by Councillor Berman. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2020-73, being a bylaw to amend procedural bylaw number bylaw 2019-75 to revise provisions related to the meeting times and questions to staff prior to a meeting be enacted and passed the 16th day of November 2020. I'm going to look to the clerk. Sarah, is this bylaw okay in its current form given the change that we just made to the meeting dates?
Your worship, I would prefer that we bring back the corrected bylaw for the next meeting on the 23rd.
Okay, thank you. So we will defer that motion until staff has had an opportunity to make the changes given the impact of the votes on the meetings. And that brings us to motions. 8.1, diversity and inclusion training. Councillor Jeffrey, this is your motion.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. I do have a seconder, and Councillor Berman, did you want to read it in? And
Sure, I'll read it in and then we'll put it on the floor. So it's moved by Councillor Jeffrey, seconded by Councillor Berman, that council herein requests staff allocate appropriate funds in the draft 2021 operating budget to provide mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all council and staff. So go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you again, Mayor Saunderson. So I think this is really important for us to consider in terms of the situation and the way things are today. And the pandemic has exposed real inequalities, not just in Canada, but in our community. And with the disproportionate impacts on women and seniors and on Indigenous and Black and racialized Canadians, I think it's important for us to just get to it. I've had the benefit at FCM, we have begun such a training. And our consultants have also come in, and they will be responsible for reviewing our entire HR policies and our advocacy policies to ensure there's no barriers. So the saying that came up today in my governance meeting for FCM was, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. So I think this is the first bite that we should consider within our overall picture of our budget this year. So that's my desire.
All right, thank you for that. Councillor Berman.
Whoa, there we go. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. It goes without saying that I support the motion because I seconded it. I just wanted to note that we had our last library board meeting after Councillor Jeffrey's notice of motion, and in the minutes of the meeting, you can see that that the board discussed this and unanimously decided that they'd like to take the training too. And I'm quite sure that when the CAO and staff look at this, they're probably already thinking about you know, the cost and the possibility of making it available to other boards and committees and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. I will look through to CAO Skinner and see if we can confirm whether we'll be looking at the broader training for other boards and committees.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Berman. Yes, we could certainly look at that municipality-wide, corporation-wide, and we do have Executive Director Culver here too. Should there be other questions on this point, as he's had a wonderful lead on this file to date.
Thank you.
Good idea. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod, did I see your card up? Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. Could someone elucidate to me kind of what this training is about? Like, we get some cybersecurity training, which is a little, you know, video guy, and are we going to be given Robin DiAngelo's book, or is it a day-long thing and people get brought in and speak? I'm just curious to know what form we're looking at.
Director Culver.
Thank you, Your Worship. we're still evaluating sort of how it could work, but we back in June, I think it was June or July, we went looking for corporate training and policy review consultation, and it was hard to figure out, hard to put a pinpoint on what was available and what we would be able to afford to some extent, but also that it was the right fit for where we are currently as an organization. So in discussion with Councillor Jeffrey and sort of as she mentioned, you know, taking a bite of elephant one bite at a time, you know, what we thought was we would actually reach out to the human level. So we have consultants that we've worked with, you know, people who've given us some guidance, people who are currently a part of our diversity and inclusion committee that's working in the background right now and getting ready to announce its presence. And a number of other individuals that we think would be really beneficial if council had the benefit of being exposed to them, their lived experiences, and understand, I think, at a human level what council might be able to do. So that's sort of how we're conceptualizing at this point, proceeding with training in order to, again, convey that human experience. There is a lot of consultation available out in the world. We think this is a really ideal first step for Collingwood and where it is at this point.
Thank you, Dean. Any follow-up, Councillor MacLeod?
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, and through you to Dean. So what I'm hearing you say is that this is going to be in-person stuff, and for us to begin, it would be a lot of listening. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, I think through you, Your Worship, I think it's listening and engaging. I think we want to make sure that we're not sort of, you know, simply listening. And I think that that's something that's come out of the group that we're working with currently, is that it's not just enough to listen, but to kind of develop a better understanding so that policy can be affected and procedure and, you know, awareness as you guys are going out about the business of making very important decisions, that you understand the implications and impact that those decisions have on the community that's both, you know, racialized or socioeconomically differentiated or through a range of abilities differentiated. And I think that that's really important. And I think that's why this approach could be very effective.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Are there any other questions or comments, council? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to item 9, bylaws 9.1, which is moved by Councillor Doherty and seconded by Councillor Berman. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2020-74, being a bylaw to appoint a municipal law enforcement officer for the corporation of the town of Collingwood, Jessica Pitts Jarvis, be enacted and passed this 16th day of November 2020. And I had the pleasure of meeting Jessica the other day, and I know she's raring to go. And my understanding, clerk, is that we need to pass this bylaw so she can get out there and put pen to paper and write some tickets. All right. So unless there are any questions or comments, I am going to call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So that brings us to item 10, notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion tonight, council? Seeing none, that brings us to county report, item 11. And we have the Simcoe County Council, I don't know if there's highlights or if we've got that on the agenda for October 27, 2020 and November 10, 2020. And I will look to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I thought I would just maybe highlight 3 items, if I may. The one that essentially has the greatest impact on all of our residents is the annual budget and where that budget is going. So in the agenda for tonight, it referenced 2 meetings on the 27th and the 10th, October 27th and November 10th. But what I wanted to reference was that the budget itself for 2021 was tabled at a special meeting on October the 29th, and staff had an opportunity to go through the budget in detail by department and outline where spending would take place, where projects would be completed, impacts that COVID has had, et cetera, countywide. I just wanted to acknowledge and thank that Councillor MacLeod participated in that particular meeting along with the mayor in my stead. I had the opportunity of watching it later via the magic of YouTube. It then went to Committee of Whole on the 10th of November. There was further deliberation, and it will then be coming to Council on the 24th, and I anticipate that it will pass, and that the $572 million budget with a anticipated 0% increase will go into effect for 2021. And just a couple of very brief comments specific to that. Obviously, there have been costs to the municipality, and there will be costs anticipated going forward as it relates to COVID. So to be able to operate at a 0% increase, the county and in particular certain departments have had to dip into some reserve funds to be able to carry forward to ensure that services were maintained, or that certain projects that were anticipated to go forward could in fact go forward. In doing so, though, there have also been a couple of other projects that have been deemed maybe not as pressing and therefore shelved for the shorter period of time. That dollar figure that I indicated of 572 million, for those who are interested, the bulk of the spending are in key services. They include paramedic at 55 million, long-term care homes at 67 million, long-term care facilities for seniors, senior services, that is, 10.3. The biggest one, so I wasn't kidding when I said the most important issue is garbage, is solid waste management. And that comes in at a price tag of $93.8 million. Children's services at 49.2 and social housing at 68.7 million. There are a number of other services that the county offers, including forestry, transportation, the airport, community services, the operation of Ontario Works on behalf of the province, et cetera, that make up that 572. So my compliments to the staff of the county for presenting, I think, a very fair budget in these challenging times. And again, to Councillor MacLeod and to the mayor for participating in that special meeting. On a positive note, and I don't know if Councillor Jeffrey, and I apologize I'm putting you on the spot, but maybe you've got some further information in your other capacity with Home Horizon, but there's some good news coming out of the county, and that is that through flow-through dollars, there's money coming to expand on the current Barbara Whiter House that's located over on Campbell Street with additional rooms and therefore obviously additional services to provide outreach to youth. And again, Barbara Whiter House is a service that specifically targets youth within the community, and they provide an invaluable service. So that is some welcome news coming out of the county. And then lastly, the last time that I think I spoke, I referred to what was happening going on at Simcoe Manor in Beaton. And since then, we've had some unfortunate news locally as it relates to our own Sunset Manor, as it relates to one positive test for COVID for a staff member and one positive test for a resident. The good news specific to the resident is that they were asymptomatic, they've been self-isolated, and there have been no other positive tests as a result since. And the same is true for the staff member involved. And I simply remind, or I simply mention that, and I'm going to go circle back to the budget. One of the biggest issues that was discussed, particularly on the 10th of November, was whether or not our Simcoe staff would receive a raise this year. And the decision by the majority was that they would. And some of the points that were made by some of my fellow colleagues was that, you know, when you look at the laundry list of services that I just referred to, many of these people are working long hours. They are exposed to dangerous situations, COVID, non-COVID, And they're working in certain industries and professions that, quite frankly, up until COVID, have gone unrecognized. PSWs are front and are a big part of that. And so I just mentioned that it's important to recognize that as part of that budget, we acknowledge the importance of our staff, both non-unionized and unionized, and that they will receive raises for 2021. And that we recognize the hard work of all of our frontline workers, whether they be at a county facility like Sunset Manor, whether they be one of our private facilities throughout the town, or whether they be in a frontline capacity doing something else. And I'll leave it at that. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any questions? Excellent report. And just as the Deputy Mayor indicated, the budget will be coming back to the Council for final ratification, but it may interest our residents to know that approximately 65% of the county budget, the 550 odd million, comes from flow through dollars from upper levels of government, and about 35% comes from the tax dollars of our 16 member municipalities, as well as some fee for services from Barrie and really the separated cities for human services like paramedics and some long-term care and housing assistance. So thank you for that, Deputy Mayor. And that brings us to item 12, 12.1, old or deferred business. Is there any old or deferred business tonight, Council? Seeing none, that brings us to other business. We've dealt with 12.2.1, and so 12.2.2 FCM Sustainable Communities Conference update. And I believe Councillor Doherty, you had asked for this item to go on the agenda. So go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. What I'd like to do, because so much of what was covered at this conference is relevant to the direction in which this municipality is headed. So what I'm going to do, there were, well over 20 different presentations, plus breakout sessions, plus workouts, workshops. Well, there's some workouts too. I will set the tone, just covering off some general themes, and then I'm going to highlight 3 municipal experiences that I think that council and staff will find interesting in light of our own declaration of climate emergency and our green initiatives. Generally the themes focused around the subject matters of energy, waste, transportation, brownfields, and water, and covered coast-to-coast municipal projects that mitigate climate change and or reduce greenhouse gas emissions through drawdown mechanisms and strategies, new technologies, retrofits and repurposements, reductions and diversions. The tone was set by keynote speaker, Dr. Catherine Wilkinson, editor-in-chief for the Drawdown Project, who reminded the participants that today, when the world's atmosphere is at a record 415 parts per million of atmospheric CO2, wholesale transformation is required to stop the average global temperature from increasing more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, the point at which we will see catastrophic sea level rise, millions of square kilometers of remaining lands becoming uninhabitable due to heat, and the extinction of millions of plants and animals. Drawdown is the future point in time when levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and start to steadily decline. This is the point when we can begin to process the process of stopping further climate change, and we begin to return to relative climatic stability. Drawdown will be achieved generally through 3 actions. First, reducing sources of greenhouse gases. Secondly, uplifting natural absorption of greenhouse gases, as in tree planting, which is also referred to as sinks, and improving societal awareness, desire, and empowerment to reduce greenhouse gases. The first community experience I'd like to highlight is from Cochrane, Alberta, and their COLT service, their Cochrane On-Demand Local Transit Service. So as we lay the groundwork, no pun intended, for our local transit study, we may be able to use the learning from Cochrane, Alberta, and their fully on-demand local transit system, which was launched just 1 year ago. Cochrane is about 25 kilometers from Calgary and shares a number of attributes with the town of Collingwood. Their current population is 30,000, and they are also one of Canada's fastest growing communities. They enjoy a vibrant tech industry in their own right, in addition to serving as home for numerous Calgary commuters. Cochrane identified the need to expand public transportation, but wanted to create the most efficient and lowest cost alternative. They received funding from FCM's Green Municipal Fund to improve public transit. They began by creating a transportation task force, which included members of council and staff, and a wide range of community stakeholders over numerous public engagement events. The task force explored multiple alternatives, but settled on a fully on-demand service. Regular bus stops and routes are maintained, with route designations informed by the town's own statistics as well as public engagement data. But customer pickups are dictated entirely by request via fully digital real-time system. So, for example, a bus does not travel to the end of the route unless there is a customer that has requested service at that stop. So we can see how that obviously injects efficiency into the system. The system provides real-time updates of routes and bus locations. People access the service via an app, which was designed and hosted by RideCo, a software specialist out of Waterloo. Users initially log on to the system and set up an account to book rides and make payments by the month or by the trip. Anyone can book using the app, or they can log on to the COLT website, or they can even call and speak to a real human dispatcher. While fares can be paid via the app, cash fares are still accepted, and fares are still extremely reasonable at $2.50 per ride or $30 per month, $25 for students. All buses are fully accessible. The net results of the initiative are that town services were expanded, ridership and revenue grew, but the total system operates at 1/3 of the cost of the former system. So second item that I would like to highlight for council, and this is because we have been talking most recently about the notion of installation of EV charging stands in the municipality. So the Kootenays is Canada's first community-led clean transportation network. The Kootenays district of BC is comprised of 3 municipalities and 150,000 residents over 58,000 square kilometers. It's home to a number of major ski resorts, and the primary industries are recreation and resources. The region had previously undertaken a GHG emission study, which illustrated that 61% of their emissions traced to all forms of transportation, so private, public, and commercial, compared to a major compact urban center like Vancouver at only 48% of GHG emissions traceable to transportation. The community was therefore motivated to explore options to reduce transportation emissions, and the municipality came to focus on the idea of creating a massive vehicle charging network and promoting itself as an electric vehicle region. 49 charging stations were installed, and not all of these are fast charge, at locations on all 3 highways serving the region, strategically located to allow any electric vehicle to travel anywhere in the 58,000 square kilometer district without fear of insufficient power to complete the journey in their electric vehicle. To be clear, this does not always involve high traffic sites. Locations are determined based on traveling distances point to point. The total cost of the project was some $2 million in 2015, with funding provided by a variety of public and private sector sources, including FCM, BC Hydro, and the local utility, their local community foundation, Steve, the municipality, and a local manufacturer of EV vehicle parts. An important part of the project was marketing, both to local residents and visitors. And these marketing efforts have been successful in positioning the region for EV tourism and for adoption of EV vehicles throughout the community, including almost 100% adoption of e-vehicles across the municipal fleet and an 868% increase in EV vehicle adoption over 4 years among residents. So really outstanding results. The final experience I'd like to cover is from Raymond, Alberta, which is now Canada's first net zero community. Raymond, Alberta began exploring solar energy installations and solutions for its municipal buildings back in 2014. And at the time, an audit and energy assessment came back negative on solar. Fast forward 2 years, with the increasing affordability of solar power installations, their first solar project was completed on their community center as a FIT installation, feed-in tariff, with positive financial results for the municipality. Council then began looking at their highest energy consuming buildings, their arena and their pool facilities. They were able to obtain 25% provincial funding, as well as FCM funding, to move forward with installations on these buildings. The municipality was able to install micro generators on some of the facilities that would generate sufficient energy to supply the host plus other municipal buildings. With an additional investment of $2.8 million, they were able to cover every municipal building's energy needs with a 16-year payback. They are now looking to use their installations for power charging stations for all of their municipal vehicles, and even to expand to supplying businesses and residents with solar power. So these are just a very few of the success stories, and I would be very happy to provide council and staff with YouTube links to these and any others that are of interest. I have to do a commercial for the FCM Green Municipal Fund before I close this off, though, that it has been integral in supporting all of these breakthrough projects in municipalities with the will, but not necessarily the financial resources for implementation. Through a unique mix of funding, which includes both grant and low interest loans, plus learning resources and training, GMF has funded 1,362 projects to improve water quality, reduce air and water pollution, expand recycling systems, minimize waste, create energy efficient transit, and restore contaminated lands. Last year, GMF was endowed with an additional $950 million of federal investment to scale up its mission to drive cost and energy efficiency across Canada, thus saving municipal resources and helping to fulfill Canada's overall emission reduction targets. Given our own,
you got your 10-minute mark there, and
oh, I'm so
appreciate
sorry.
all of the information you've been giving us. Is there anything you want to quickly just wrap up with?
Yes, that we as a municipality need to be making inquiries with the Green Municipal Fund every time we embark on a new infrastructure project. The money is there, and it's incredible what we may be able to achieve as a community that has declared a climate crisis.
Great.
And that's it.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions or comments, Council, for Councillor Doherty on her presentation? Go ahead, Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Councillor Doherty, just thank you for that. I know it's really energizing and exciting. It reminds me, Councillor Hamlin goes to things on Youthful Cities and you get all this information and you want to get it out there. If you have any links or notes, kindly share them. They were very intriguing examples. Thank you for them.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, and is there any other business, Council? Councillor Jeffrey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just very quickly, at the risk of being FCM inundated, today we kicked off our Advocacy Days board meetings that will be held over the next 2 weeks. And you would have received in your inbox today our Building Back Better Together document upon which all of our conversations with government leaders will be based over the next 2 weeks. And the highlights are, well, I really hope you go read it. It's only a 24-page document, but really pointed that with its 2,000 municipal members, we will work to urge the federal government to create jobs, promote equality, and tackle climate change in the places where people live, work, and raise families. And in addition to the exposed real inequalities that I spoke to with inclusivity and diversity, there's also an extreme pressure to help people experiencing homelessness. And so FCM's proposals include scaling up the new rapid housing initiative to bring supportive housing and additional job creating investments in affordable housing to help families living in inadequate and overcrowded housing. You've heard from Councillor Doherty, obviously, that the Green Recovery Plan emphasizes public transit, community climate action, investing in efficient transit and zero emission transit vehicles to create jobs and shorten commutes while significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then finally, FCM is also stressing the need for continued operating funding support for municipalities so that they can protect the frontline services and gear up for recovery. So the first amount that we received in the Safe Restart Agreement will need extending as pandemic is going to impact us through to 2021. And that's a shortened version, but please go read the report and the strategy and what we will be advocating for over the next 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. All right, Council, it's been a full meeting. So I will look, then we'll go to the confirmatory bylaw. And it is moved by Councillor Berman, seconded by Councillor Jeffrey. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2020-75, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the regular meeting of council held November 16, 2020, be enacted and passed this 16th day of November 2020. I'll call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously, and I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you, Council. That was a productive meeting. Enjoy the rest of the night.